This overview serves as a preview to the next lecture, Externalities, Pagoo to Kos. This is looking at our simple economic model, supply and demand, and saying what happens when we have non-perfect market conditions. We're going to look at this. We're going to try and get just the basic ideas of externalities down so that we can have the vocabulary to launch into a little bit more beyond principles level discussion and talk about externalities from Pagoo to Kos. All right, so here we go. The first thing we have to do is we have to ask this basic question of what are externalities, right? So this is kind of the preview material that you should have had in a principles level class that now we want to make sure you have down pat so that we can kind of launch into everything once we get going with the next lecture. So what are externalities? Well, we can look at external costs. These are the costs not borne by the acting individual. So if an individual acts according to supply and demand, what we're mapping is the individual's private costs that they face and the individual's private benefits that they get, right? And people only act according to the costs and benefits that they internalize, that are borne by them. However, there are sometimes external costs, costs that other people face that you do not. So a classic example is pollution. If I am, making widgets in my factory, well, I will consider the costs that I face, but there might be some costs that other people bear, such as pollution from, the factory producing and emitting emissions into the air that other people are harmed by and face other costs. But there's also external benefits potentially. Sometimes I do not capture or internalize all of the benefits from my own private actions. So external benefits are benefits not borne by the individual, right? So the acting individual doesn't take these in. So a classic example of this sometimes given is research and development. So sometimes a company could spend some money on research and development and come up with some new invention, and they get a bunch of profits from getting this new invention, but perhaps there's some other companies that can pick up on things and kind of copy what they've done, or other advances are made and society prospers and benefits above and beyond what just the firm who was doing the research and development originally did. Here we see a way of diagramming negative externalities. In addition to the supply curve, we draw a social cost curve. With negative externalities, the cost of the curve will lie to the left of the supply curve. Right? We can think about this and what would happen here. At any given quantity, we can think of what the private cost is. And then we'd say at that quantity, the social cost, right, is much higher, right? And so we have this external cost associated with producing that quantity. Note, we could also have a negative externality and have the social benefits curve be down and to the left from the private benefit or the private demand curve. This demand curve would be to the left of the market demand, but the most common norm in economics, however, is to show the negative externalities on the supply and positive externalities on demand. So when we look at a negative externality, what ends up happening is also that we move the equilibrium point, the private equilibrium point, right, is originally where the private supply and demand cross, and now it is up where we'd like it to be, would be where the social cost curve hits the demand curve. So what happens is that the optimal amount for society's production would be this Q society, but the amount that we actually get is this market quantity. Then we can move to the positive externalities, and you see the same analysis here. The private supply and demand leads us to the market outcome equilibrium, where the supply curve crosses the demand curve. But the optimal amount for society's production would be where the demand social benefits curve crosses with the supply curve. Right? And what this is basically just saying is that same kind of argument here. We're at pick a given quantity. And so say we're at some quantity here, right around here, right? This quantity, we see the benefit as the area underneath the demand curve, right? So the benefit to the individual is shown as this, but the benefit to society is much higher, right? The benefit to society includes the private benefits of that individual, plus some societal benefits, some benefits that were not captured by the acting individual, and thus we have a positive externality because we have external benefits from that consumption. Here we can see the quantity that society would optimally produce, right, is a greater quantity than when we actually produce in just standard market settings. And so we end up with a problem of not producing as much as we should when we have a positive externality, which is the flip side of what we had when we had a negative externality where we produced too much.